Perhaps it was Shakyamuni who had said, Pujya cha pujaniyam etam mangalam uttamam. One should honor those who are worthy of honor. That is the highest blessings. I do not know whether I am worthy of the honor that has been conferred on me. To be in this hallowed presence, to be in this sacred precincts itself, it gives one a feeling of regeneration. मैं अंग्रेजी में ही बोलता हूं क्योंकि मेरा हिंदी इतना परिपक्व नहीं है और मैं यहाँ इसलिए बीच बीच में अगर हिंदी में थोड़ा कठिनाई आए इसलिए क्षमा चाहता हूं. Most venerable Sivali Theroji, whose presence, whose guidance, and whose friendship I have started cherishing very deeply. My very dear friend in Delhi, Venerable Silavansa Theroji, Venerable Sumitanandaji, who received us here on an August afternoon with a lot of warmth, Venerable Sumit Theroji, and the most venerable Bhikkhu Sangha and all the venerables who are here, I bow down to you and express my deep gratitude. Ram Mohan ji and Sandeep ji, Mukund ji, and all the senior members of the governing board, and Professor Praveen Kumar Srivastav ji. I am extremely delighted, honored to be here in this precincts. I have always this concrete feeling that this temple is not just a temple. It is a concrete, crystallized, condensed presence of Anagarika Dharmapala. Whether we should call him Devamitta Dharmapala, it is him. This temple is him. It is he who continues to live here, to be here, and to act through his immortal dynamism, still pursuing the mission with which he came to this land of Bharat. I do not know whether we have the adhikara or whether we have the capacity to count whether it is the third or fourth birth that he is in, because he had said he would be returning 25 times. 25 बार लौटेंगे इस काम को, इनका ये मिशन को आगे बढ़ाने के लिए. It was from here, from Sarnath, and the Mahabodhi Society of India report and welcome address of November 11, 1931 says it is from Sarnath Isi Pattana, the sacred place, that Lord Buddha sent out the first batch of his missionaries, 60 in number, in different directions, each traveling alone with this remarkable injunction: go ye, O bhikkhus, and wander forth for the gain of the many, in the compassion for the world, for the good, for the gain, for the welfare of gods and men. Proclaim, O bhikkhus, the doctrine glorious. Preach a life of holiness perfect and pure. ये मेरा शब्द नहीं है. महाबोधि सोसाइटी ऑफ इंडिया का जो वेलकम एड्रेस और रिपोर्ट 11 नवंबर 1931 को इसी प्रांगण में बोला गया था, उसी रिपोर्ट से मैं आपको उद्धृत कर रहा हूं. And from such humble beginning, one can say it was from Sarnath, from such humble beginning We know that Buddhism rose to be the state religion of India, creating in the course of 1200 years of its domination a cultural India, a cultural Asia, the breadth and depth and height of which modern savants are research scholars all over the world are still unraveling. राम मोहन जी, आपने मुझे चीफ स्पीकर का न्योता दिया है, तो मुझे थोड़ा आपको झेलना पड़ेगा, क्योंकि मैं बहुत कुछ कहना चाहता हूं. मेरा जो अनुभूति है, उस अनुभूति के माध्यम से मेरे मन में जो भी विचार आ रहे हैं, क्योंकि हम आज अमृतकाल भारत का बात कर रहे हैं. टुडे वी स्पीक ऑफ अमृतकाल इन इंडिया. और प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी जी has very clearly said that the 21st century is the Asian century. But in the Asian century, you cannot imagine, you cannot think of the Asian century without Buddha. उस संदर्भ में, उस परिप्रेक्ष्य में हमको आज ये पावन अवसर को देखना पड़ेगा और सोचना पड़ेगा. Should I continue? On a personal note, it was through Swami Vivekananda that I came to Buddha. Pathak ji, you have very rightly pointed out. Sister Nivedita speaks, she writes about Swami Vivekananda in The Master as I Saw Him. And she says something very interesting. On the first day of his sannyasa, the moment he was initiated into sannyasa, Swami Vivekananda's first act was to hurry to Bodh Gaya and sit under the great tree, saying to himself, "Is it possible that I breathe the air he breathed, that I touch the earth he trod?" उनके जीवन के पहले दिन संन्यास ग्रहण करने के बाद वो बोध गया गए और वहां बोधि वृक्ष के नीचे वो ध्यान मग्न हो गए स्वामी विवेकानंद. और सिस्टर निवेदिता सेज, at the end of his life again, similarly, he arrived in Bodh Gaya on the morning of his 39th birthday. That was the last year of his life. On the morning of his 39th birthday, Swami Vivekananda, 12th January, arrived in Bodh Gaya. And this journey, ending with a visit to Banaras, was the last he ever made. The last journey that he ever made in his life, Swami Vivekananda, was to Bodh Gaya. And once, when a certain person was confused about his faith, was confused about what faith Swami Vivekananda belonged to, his immediate reply was a Buddhist. And then he said, "I am the servant of the servants of the servant of Buddha." This is Swami Vivekananda. I am the servant of the servants of the servant of Buddha. And Swami Ranganathananda ji, the 13th president of the Ramakrishna Mission, in an immortal speech delivered on 30th May 1956, on the 2500th birth anniversary of Lord Buddha, where he spoke about Bhagavan Buddha and our heritage. And he says something so powerful, he says something so convincing. He says, when the great message of Buddha, this is Swami Ranganathananda ji, the 13th president of the Ramakrishna Mission, when the great message of Buddha throbbed in the hearts of millions of our country, the whole nation rose morally, spiritually, as also politically. And with that accession of strength, our nation became the center for a wide and rich cultural diffusion in the world outside. Greater India of the historical period is the gift of Buddha to us and the world. With Buddha started that organized expansion of Indian culture and Indian thought outside India, for which half the world is grateful to this country today. And then he says, Swami Vivekananda is one of the most prominent leaders of our country in recent times. And this is very moving. It is very important. He is one of the most prominent leaders of our country in recent times who has called our attention to the great work of Buddha in the past and the greater work that the Buddha spirit can do to us today. It was Swamiji who pointed out to us the origin of almost all the social maladies of our time, all those things which made us immobile as a people, leading to the accumulation of all sorts of evils in our body politic. All these experiences of recent centuries can be traced back to the banishment of the Buddha spirit, of the Buddha heart, or from the thought and practice of our country. When the Buddha spirit, the Buddha heart was banished from this country, all the evil descended, this Swami Vivekananda is saying. It is, now Swami Vivekananda says, he exhorted us to turn back once again to that great heritage, to call back Buddha to our nation and to our hearts. He also added that until we did that, our country could never hope to develop that internal strength which we wish to pray for. Devamitta Dharmapala brought back Buddha to the Indian heart. That was one of his principal contribution to this civilization. Friends, I came to Mahabodhi Society through Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee. And Dr. Pathak mentioned here. And through Mahabodhi Society, I have begun getting introduced to Anagarika Dharmapalaji and to his immortal contribution. And isn't it beautiful? He says that I have come to this land of a noble people. Dharmapalaji says, I have come to this land of a noble people to tell them of the sweet things which the Blessed One, O capital, which the Blessed One taught them 2,500 years ago. So I think if you look at the essence, the mission, he, by establishing the Mahabodhi Society, has brought back Buddha to our heart and to our soul. As a Bengali, I am extremely proud that Dharmapalaji lived the longest in Calcutta, that the headquarters of the Mahabodhi Society was in Kolkata, and some of the leading Bengali Hindus, thought leaders, political leaders, cultural leaders, educationists, they all converged and they came forward to support Dharmapalaji. Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, perhaps Mahabodhi Society of India is the only organization where father and son were both president of Mahabodhi Society. Sir Ashutosh Mukherjee, president of Mahabodhi Society, the first whom Dharmapalaji recruited in that sense, invited from 1911 to 1924 till his death in 1924. And Justice Manmatnath Mukherjee, from 1924 to 1942, president of Mahabodhi Society, a great reformer. And then Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, for 11 years, Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, each one of them made massive contributions to our national life. You may know that Sir Ashutosh Mukherjee not only was a great judge, he was one of the greatest educationists of modern India. He was Vice Chancellor of Calcutta University while he was President of Mahabodhi Society. As Vice Chancellor of Calcutta University, Dharmapalaji convinced him to start the Pali Studies Center in the university. And it was during his time, Mahabodhi Society, of its deeper mission, of its global vision, it was part of the self-awakening of India, of Bharat as well. Now, I came across a very interesting facet of Dharmapalaji's personality. Being a student of history and especially having interest in India's freedom struggle, because you may be aware that we have celebrated the 75th year of our independence. I came across a very inspiring dimension of Dharmapalaji. Dharmapala, the nationalist, the staunch nationalist, who was not only part of India's awakening, but was one of the boldest and strongest voices of Sri Lanka's awakening. And as I studied, I realized that for 5 years, he was kept under confinement in Kolkata. The publication that he edited, the Sinhala Bauddhaya, was banned in Sri Lanka. His family was kept in confinement, but that did not deter, it did not stop Dharmapalaji. He continued with the propagation of the ideal. And even when he was confined for 5 years, he continued his propagation. And the best part is, at the end of his confinement, you realize that he has already set up the Dharmarajika Vihara in Kolkata in 1920. His nationalist sentiments were very strong. And in Sinhala Bauddhaya, his article titled Vande Mataram, where he writes about how Bengal was awakening. And these are his words, so strong words. When the Bengalis, who were held in contempt by the British, began to show bravery and willingness to die for a cause, the rulers were forced to change their opinion. And then he writes, death comes to everyone. The whole of India echoed with the cry that the motherland was worth dying for. This is Dharmapala writing in Sinhala Bauddhaya, his article called Vande Mataram. And then he says, the Sinhalas of Sri Lanka, he exhorted them to wake up. And as I went through that part of his personality, I realized that that time the British Sri Lankan government was very closely observing him. And in a secret intelligence report, they are writing about Dharmapalaji because he had galvanized Sinhalese. He had galvanized Sri Lankans. When we spoke about self-reliance here, he spoke about self-reliance in Sri Lanka. He exhorted Sri Lankans to awaken their inherent strength within. And so, the secret report about Dharmapala says, Dharmapala was quite reverse of innocent as regarding politics, and that his preachings and writings in Ceylon was instigating the young. Like Swami Vivekananda, even he insisted that young Sri Lankans go abroad, learn technology, learn science, get exposed to new knowledge, and come back and work for the salvation and for the liberation of Sri Lanka. Friends, I think when we look at his personality, this is one aspect which is so inspiring. And no wonder people like Narendranath Sen, the editor of the Indian Mirror, one of his closest collaborators in Bengal, repeatedly wrote about his activities, about his views, about the mission of Mahabodhi Society in the pages of the Indian Mirror, which was one of the leading English journals being brought out of Calcutta. And please remember that Calcutta at that point of time was the capital of India. So Dharmapalaji was right there in the capital of Bharat with his mission. And it is there that he decided to set up the headquarters. And Dr. Shama Prasad Mukherjee, as president of Mahabodhi Society, you may be aware that he not only, with the strong collaboration of Dr. Devapriya Valasina, he took the initiative to bring back the relics of Mahamoggallana and Sariputta to India and to reinter it in the new Vihara in Sachi, which he, along with Dr. Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru and others, inaugurated in December 1952. And the relics, the sacred relics of Buddha, the relics of Mahamoggallana Sariputta, with the active collaboration and support of the Mahabodhi Society of India, with Dr. Shama Prasad Mukherjee as president of the Mahabodhi Society of India, was taken around Southeast Asia. And they went to Hanoi also. They went to Bangkok. They went to Cambodia, to Myanmar. In Cambodia, in Phnom Penh, 500,000 people had turned up to listen to the president of Mahabodhi Society and to have darshana of the sacred relics. Therefore, friends, I think we need to understand the link. We need to understand the sacred links. And my work today is just to tie those dots, to link the dots. That is what I have been wanting and I intend to do. I want you to close your eyes and go back in November 1931 and this very precincts and the description of Dharmapalaji himself. When this temple was consecrated finally, when this temple was finally inaugurated, Dharmapalaji writes in his diary, he says, "The end of my career as a bhikkhu is splendidly romantic. For 45 years I worked as a brahmachari and received the homage of various people throughout the world. After 800 years, Mahabodhi Society has begun the great work of its revival in holy Isipattana in Banaras." He says this on November 11th, 1931. By then, he was already keeping indifferent health, but that fire, that spark, that dynamism was undiminished. And then he writes in his diary, he gives the description of the entire event. At 2:30 the procession started and the procession marched across, came here, and then Dharmapalaji writes, "The Nayaka Theros planted the sapling." Here, the sapling brought from there and planted here. So I want you to close your eyes and just go with him, go with his description. "The Director General of Archaeology in India planted another. I planted the third," Dharmapalaji says. "The Nayakas spoke, the bhikkhus chanted Parita, Ganges water was poured on the saplings. I spoke a few words." Now is the sentence. So moving. He says, "For the love I bear to the people of India, I planted the sapling." The Nayaka Theros represented the Buddhist world, and the tree planted by the Director General of Archaeology represents the British government. I represent the people of India. I think that is something we in this country must continuously forever remember with deep gratefulness. He says, and then he says, "At the end I spoke, expressing my delight at the completion of my labors begun 40 years ago, and said that I present the Vihara to the people of India. It was a happy ending of my 40 years labor in the land of Buddha." India in his consciousness, Bharat, उनके चेतना में भारत समाहित था. उनका अंतिम जो सार्वजनिक, महान सार्वजनिक कार्यक्रम, उनका अंतिम कार्यक्रम जो था, एक प्रकार से हम कह सकते हैं इनके उनका अंतिम कार्यक्रम था, उसमें भी उन्होंने सिर्फ भारत और भारत का ही प्रतिनिधित्व किया अपने तरफ से, ये उनका मानना था. And let us remember that it was in Sarnath that he came at the age of 27, and it is in Sarnath that he attained Mukti, Nirvana, at the age of 68. His entire span of 40 years, and that is why I said, this place, this precincts, is he himself. And at the end, the last days, his physical last days, he wanted to spend gazing at the Mool Gandhakuti Vihar. India was foremost in his thoughts. अंतिम दिन में भी भारत उनके चेतना में, सोच में सर्वोपरि था. And he wrote in his diary, the Sarnath diaries, like the squirrel that tried to bail out the waters of the ocean to save his little son, I have exerted hard to revive Buddhism in this land of Buddha. At the end, having done what he did, having shaken the world, having connected, having revived, having reawakened the Buddha consciousness in the land of Buddha, he says, my role was that of a squirrel. Not more than that. My role was that of a squirrel. And I have exerted myself to revive Buddhism in the land of Buddha. If I read this, sometimes I wonder whether we have at all even become squirrels. If he can say he is just a squirrel. And what is interesting is, you may know, Pathakji has mentioned, that when this inauguration of this mandira took place, some of the greatest minds of India were present here. And it was a journey of discovery for me. I realized that Ramananda Chatterjee read out the message of the Hindu Mahasabha. Ramananda Chatterjee was one of the greatest journalist, cultural icon, nationalist of India. 50 years unparalleled contribution to awakening Indian culture, to the spread of Indian culture. He was present. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru with Kamala Nehru and his sisters were present here. And principal of the Sanskrit College, one of the greatest philosophers, Dr. Surendranath Dasgupta, chaired a convention such as this, a Dhamma Sabha, chaired a convention on the message of Buddha and the world. And in that, papers were presented among others by Pandit Vidushekar Shastri, one of the greatest educationists, one of the greatest Sanskritists from Shantiniketan in Vishwabharati. And a special exhibition was displayed for 3 days here with the iconic painting by Nandalal Bose, one of the closest disciples of Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore, which showed Sanghamitra going to Ceylon to preach the conveyance of the Bodhi sapling by Emperor Ashoka to Ceylon, to Sri Lanka. That was Nandalal Bose's painting which was displayed. And the Mahabodhi journal had contributors like Rabindranath Tagore and Sarala Devi Chaudhurani, one of the greatest women icon of India, of nationalism, whose 150th birth anniversary we celebrated a few days ago. Therefore, friends, why am I saying these things? Is because the Mahabodhi Society of India was the fulcrum, it was the center of some of the greatest minds who shaped modern India. And you may be aware that on 20th November 1956, after having addressed the World Buddhist Brotherhood Conference in Kathmandu, Baba Saheb Ambedkar arrived on 25th November 1956 to Sarnath. He arrived at 1 p.m. in Sarnath. He was received by the Bhikkhu Sangha. And Baba Sahib said, here in Sarnath, Buddhism is like the sea. It entertains no discrimination. By professing compassion, the Buddha appealed to the contemporary depressed mind and showed them the right path. One of the greatest thinkers of modern India, the founding father of our constitution, the icon of social justice movement in India, Baba Sahib Ambedkar. Very interestingly, the last public meeting that he ever had in his life was in Sarnath. On 25th November, 26th November, he was here, and within 10 days, on 6th December 1956, he passed away in Delhi. And introducing Baba Sahib Ambedkar in this very hall, Dr. Dharmarakkhita said, India is witnessing a resurrection of Buddhism after a lapse of 2500 years post Lord Buddha's Mahaparinibbana. And the Bodhisattva who has taken up this task upon himself is present himself before us in the person of Baba Sahib. So do I believe. In this very Sarnath, 2500 years ago on such a Sunday, at the site of this very Dhammika Stupa, the Exalted One had turned the wheel of righteousness for the group of five. And so, Dr. Dharmarakkhita welcomed Baba Sahib Ambedkar here. And I may remind you that one of the last books that he wrote in his life, and a book which he was impatient to finish, and a book to which he gave the introduction on the last night of his life, was the Buddha and his Dhamma. And on 30th May 1956, 56 was a very important year in Baba Sahib Ambedkar's life. On 30th May 1956, his talk was broadcast in the BBC. The title of the talk was, Why I Like Buddhism and How It Is Useful to the World in Its Present Circumstances. And Baba Sahib says, I prefer Buddhism because it gives three principles in combination which no other religion does. Buddhism teaches prajna, understanding as against superstition and supernaturalism, karuna, compassion, and samata, equality. This is what man wants for a good and happy life. ये डॉक्टर बाबा साहेब अम्बेडकर का उनका एक साक्षात्कार बीबीसी में ब्रॉडकास्ट हुआ था. उसमें उन्होंने स्पष्ट तरीके से ये कहा, और नवंबर 1956 उनका अंतिम सार्वजनिक कार्यक्रम इसी जगह सारनाथ में था. I gave this background because I think we'll need to look at ourselves in the backdrop of this march of history when we look towards the future. And we have to remember that at this point of time, right now, we are passing through a very interesting and through a very dynamic phase as far as Buddha and Buddha's message and the spread of the Buddha legacy world across is concerned. Venerable Vaskaduve Mahinda Vansa Mahanayaka Thero of Sri Lanka and very respected, most venerable Upathisaji is here. The last time I met him was in Myanmar. And both me and my wife, we have had the good fortune of receiving his compassion and his blessings. And I remember the letter you wrote to Honorable Prime Minister from Japan. It, I think, gave rise to tears in many eyes, because you made that assessment and that your words radiated that which we all aspire for. And therefore, when I quote Mahidavansa Mahanayaka Thero of Sri Lanka, who said, especially under Prime Minister Modi, we see a great revival of Buddhism in India. And Buddhism is about compassion and happiness. Friends, in the last few years, we have had a prime minister who openly talks about his association with Buddhism. He was born in Vadnagar, one of the greatest centers of Buddhist learning. And as Chief Minister of Gujarat, he was the first Chief Minister in independent India who convened a Buddhist conference from 20 countries in Gujarat. From Kandy to Kyoto, from Hanoi to Hambantota, Lord Buddha is omnipresent through his thoughts, relics and culture. This is what Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi says and he believes. He has himself traveled on the global Buddhist circuit. And in the last few years, if you recall the outreach that he has initiated, it has been unparalleled in the history of independent India. If you recall his visit to the Gandhan monastery, carrying the sapling of the Bodhi tree, if you recall the manner in which the sacred relics were taken around Mongolia for 1 month, no such event has happened after the great Kushak Bakola Rinpoche. And the manner in which the people of Mongolia responded to it. In Gandhan monastery, let us remember that the sacred relics of Atisha Dipankara is also kept. And it is there that the Prime Minister of independent India takes a sapling of the Bodhi tree to present it to them. Friends, you may have heard of Mission Life, lifestyle for environment, where Prime Minister has repeatedly on global forums invoked Buddha. That we start purification, we start it with ourselves. While inaugurating the International Buddhist Summit in Delhi in April this year, Prime Minister had remarked about the Herculean problem of climate change, which could be addressed if people became conscious of their lifestyle and if the movement towards change begins with the individual. Mission Life has created a huge sensation across the world. People have responded from across countries. And Prime Minister Modi says Mission Life is influenced by the inspirations of Buddha. It furthers Buddha's thoughts. He says we cannot let our planet remain wounded. Glaciers are melting. Rivers and forests are in danger. Let us turn to Buddha. He says, Lord Buddha put emphasis on a way of life where respect for Mother Nature is paramount. This aspect of Buddha philosophy has now become the sustaining vision of Mission Life. Friends, I can go on and on, but let us remember the emphasis that he gives on cleanliness. And if you look at the diary, January 25th, 1916, if you look at Devamitra's diary, he writes, sanitation is the highest science leading to spiritual aesthetics. Wonderful words. I see that being reflected in India today. The consciousness regarding sanitation, cleanliness and environmental conservation that is growing up, that is awakening in the collective consciousness. And today, friends, I'm extremely happy to say this in front of such a collective sacredness sitting in front of us today, that this month, in the first week of this month, most venerable, in the first week of this month, India allocated a landmark grant of $15 million to Sri Lanka to bolster the long-standing Buddhist connections between our two countries. The first project to be initiated under the $15 million grant is the solar electrification of religious sites across Sri Lanka, and with an allocation of $10 million. And then the fund allocated is to be used towards construction and renovation of Buddhist monasteries, capacity development, cultural exchange, archaeological cooperation, reciprocal exhibition of relics, and other areas of mutual interest. I think at every step we are seeing what Anagarika Dharma, that in June 2023 this year, Vitasta, the Kashmir festival, was held in Srinagar. And what was the theme of that festival? Seminar on Buddha, Dhamma and Kashmir. And the festival aimed to celebrate the cultural heritage of Kashmir and promote dialogue on the historical significance of Buddha Dhamma in that region. First time in independent India that you are having a festival, a conference, a seminar on Buddha Dhamma in Kashmir. And Anagarika Dharmapalaji writes in one of his speeches, he says here in Sarnath, how Buddha Dhamma was eradicated from Kashmir in the past and how that has to be rediscovered and revived. And you know that last year in May 2022, I'll just take a few more minutes. In May 2022, the Ambedkar Chair for Buddhist Studies in Lumbini was established in Lumbini Buddhist University, first time. And the International Center for Buddhist Culture and Heritage. The Shilanyas was done, this foundation laying ceremony was done for that unique center in Lumbini. Once completed, the center will be a world-class facility, welcoming pilgrims and tourists from all over the world. It will be a modern building, net zero compliant in terms of energy, water, and waste handling, and will house prayer halls, meditation centers, library, exhibition hall, cafeteria, offices, and other amenities. You see, it's very interesting. The focus is whatever structure we are putting up in terms of spreading Buddha's message always has the element of environmental purity in it, and therefore zero net emission. With Sri Lanka, it's going to be electrification with solar power. Environmental consciousness is there. You are all aware how the Kushinagar International Airport, which was inaugurated, completely over the years will change the entire speed and connectivity of this region. It will enable millions of pilgrims to come directly to this region, and it will enhance connectivity and it will enhance speed as well. 340 crore rupees in an initial effort has been allotted for creating the Buddhist circuit in India. Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat, Andhra Pradesh all come under the Buddha circuit. And so this is an ongoing effort. The Mahabodhi Cultural Center in Bodh Gaya is a massive state-of-the-art, one of the most modern centers, convention centers that has ever been dedicated to Buddha in this country. 2,000 sitting capacity auditorium, halls of 500 capacities each, a 800 capacity dining room, 150 crores has been spent behind erecting the Mahabodhi Cultural Center. 140 crores has been allotted for the development of Sarnath as well. And for a number of other such activities. As I said, I can go on and on, but you may be aware, I was not aware of this, but then someone brought it to my notice. The paintings of Ajanta, because we are here in a hall which has a great heritage value because of the Japanese significance connect to it, the way it has been restored. Last time I came, the restoration work was going on under Sumitanandaji's direction. So the Ajanta paintings on Buddha are all going to be in the process of being stored as digital data in the Norway Arctic World Archive forever. It's going to be a heritage of humanity preserved and never to be destroyed. And so therefore, friends, I think we can each discover for ourselves the march towards the Asian century that is taking place. And I urge you all to please listen to these last words. When the Prime Minister of India says, those who imagine the 21st century to be Asia's probably forget one aspect. There can be no 21st century belonging to Asia without Buddha. There can be no 21st century without Buddha. It is Buddha only who can inspire the world. This is the Prime Minister of India's words. Friends, that Asian century has begun taking shape, and India is imparting it with a lasting philosophic foundation inspired by Buddha's civilizational message. And all these are indicators of the realization of Anagarika Dharmapala's hopes, aspirations, his expectations from India. And I can only urge, let Mahabodhi Society of India play a special role in shaping the Asian century, inspired by Anagarika Dharmapala's vision. Let us all play our role, as he said of himself, like the squirrel, and exert hard to imagine and shape this new century inspired and driven by Buddha. I thank you all for this singular honor that you have accorded to me. I express my deep gratitude to the Venerable Bhikkhu Sangha, and I seek Shakya Muni's blessings so that in my humble way I can contribute to the great mission that Mahabodhi Society of India represents in India and in the world today. Dhanyavad. Anuttama was supposed to come, but she could not make it because her father is not well, my father-in-law. But she was remembering you. He was remembering you since morning today.
भौतिक स्वरूप आप देख रहे हैं, यह श्रीमद अनागारी धर्मपाल जी के कठिन संघर्षों का परिणाम है। आज इस स्वरूप में यहाँ बैठे हुए हैं और याद कर रहे हैं श्रीमद अनागारी धर्मपाल को, उनके कार्यों को, इस टेम्पल के दिए गए उनके योगदान को। हमारे बीच में उपस्थित हुए हैं आज के प्रेसिडेंट